So the next thing that I'm going to do is start to incorporate some of the techniques that we looked at from Ian Murphy and Phill Patricio. Really want to have a little look at his work and think about what you want to do. So here's an example that I did with a turtle. This time around I'm going to keep the background less busy because I think it's too much and it distracts from the drawing, but I do really like the little dribbles here. So every time we do a piece of work we need to look at it and we need to think about, well, what went well, what don't I like, what could I change, and put that into place in further development. So I do like the dribbles, I do like the book paper, I like the white paint, but I just want less of it. So I think what I'm going to do before I do the background is just add in just a few little bits of book paper. I think I'm going to be a little bit clever about this. I've still got my drawing in place from last time. And I've just put the book paper underneath. And what I'm going to do is draw out some of the shapes that I want to be quite exact about. So I like that collar and I'm going to be quite exact about that. What have we done here? There we go. Oh, that is right. Yeah, so I'm going to stick those pieces of colour in place, which is quite a lot neater than what I did in this last piece, which is quite ripped, less control, but I was going for quite a messy effect as Ian Murphy does. This time I'm being a bit more thoughtful and clean. It depends what your artistic style is, really. There we go. The next thing that I'm going to do, just looking back to my techniques, I've used a little bit of the book paper. The next thing that I'm going to do is start to add some shading into the face before I do a wet into wet background, because I don't want to be putting my hand in wet paint. So now is the time that I'm going to peel that picture off, and I'm going to have the picture next to my work. I'm going to use a blender, I'm going to use a pencil, and I'm going to start to add in some detail, especially in areas like the eyes, which I want people to focus on. So good shading is where we use, now we have to be careful of that carbon paper, is where we use a dark, a medium and a light tone. Okay, when it does come to detail, for example the hair, you want to be thinking about thick lines, thin lines, lines that go from thick to thin, and thinking about those line gradients. Now, you should be looking at your picture and thinking very carefully about when you do add tone, it's important to build up sort of base layers, and I think a lot of people, especially on portraiture, are really quick to draw in those things like eyebrows and eyelashes, but what you want to think about is getting sort of a base skin tone in first. before you get any of that detail in. So I've got a little bit in. I'm not going to shade everything. I'm going to leave some bits sort of unfinished. And if we look at Ian Murphy's work, he does leave areas unfinished. Not every area needs to be super detailed. Just think about where you want your audience's attention to go to. So I'm not so fussed about the hair. What I might do is one big sweep of dark and getting a little bit direction, but I'm not going to put much more in than that. So the purpose of this video is to show you really sort of what you can achieve by putting these techniques together that we studied, Ian Murphy's techniques and Felipe Patricio's techniques. Okay, so I'm going to go back to that sheet. Whenever we look at an artist, we pick apart their artwork and pick the different techniques out. And then we can use that inspiration in our own artwork. So now I'm going to come to, I could sit and finish that drawing. I could leave areas like this. I'm happy with both, and we know that Ian Murphy actually does both. He leaves areas unfinished and he leaves areas detailed. So it's not something new that I'm making up. I'm going to go over to my paints now, and I'm going to have a little go at just very carefully using the tip of the brush, just adding in a little bit of colour. I'm not going to make it too strong because I learnt from my last one that I don't like it like that. It distracts from the artwork in front. But I am going to use that wet into wet technique that Ian Murphy uses. So I've wet my page and I'm just going to work some other tones in. And now I'm going to try the dripping technique, but I'm going to try my best to be controlled and not go into my drawing. And there we go. So I've used, where's my technique sheet? I have used two techniques. So I've used the wet into wet. Sorry, I've used three. I've used wet into wet, I've used the dribbling, and I've used the book paper. And I'm quite happy to leave that that idea there. If there was something that I wanted to maybe experiment with, I could try using pen over here. I could try putting a little bit of colour pencil in. There's lots of things, as long as you're looking back at that technique sheet and just picking out things that you want to try, and keep coming up with different ideas. Maybe when it's dry I could sit and I could work in some of the brown paper. I think that looks quite nice. I do like it on top of the paint, but I'd have to wait for that paint to dry. So have fun using your techniques, creating some different ideas inspired by our artists.